The snow came down in slow, heavy flakes like it didn't have the strength to fall fast. It covered everything, tracks, roofs, signs, until even the little train station outside Red Rock looked like part of the empty prairie. Standing beneath the eaves, her wool coat too thin for the wind and her boots soaked through, Mary Ellen Harper kept her hands pressed under her arms and tried not to shake. But she was shaking. Her fingers, her shoulders, even her knees, all trembling with cold and something deeper. Fear, maybe, or shame. She had come so far with nothing left. Just a satchel with 2 dresses, a tin of hairpins, and a letter she kept folded close to her chest like a shield. She had read it so many times the paper was soft, the words smudged. We are in need of a governess for our children on Rocking H Ranch, outside Red Rock, Montana. If agreeable, you may present yourself at the Red Rock station. C. McAllister. No, dear madam. No, respectfully. No name except that plain C. McAllister. She didn't even know if it was a man or woman. But it was a job, and it had come just days before she was about to be turned out of the boarding house in Chicago. The matron said she'd kept Mary Ellen on longer than she should have out of kindness. Mary Ellen had said thank you, because that's what you say when you've run out of pride. Now she was 25, unmarried, disgraced in every way a woman could be, and standing in a town she'd never heard of before the letter came. The train had pulled away 2 hours ago, and no one had come for her. The wind slipped beneath her collar, and she pressed her chin down, eyes sweeping the snow-packed street. Nothing moved except a stray dog nosing in a trash pile. The buildings were squat and worn, with crooked signs and shuttered windows. The saloon door flapped once, then stilled. She hadn't seen a soul pass by since the telegraph boy took one look at her, shivering and thin, and ducked inside the post office. Mary Ellen told herself to wait. Maybe this C. McAllister had trouble getting through the snow. Ranches were far off, weren't they? Maybe they thought the train would be late. She clung to those maybes the way she used to cling to prayer. But that had been before her father's bank failed, before her mother drank herself quiet, before the man who promised marriage left her alone in a backroom boarding house with a ring that turned her finger green. Something inside her cracked then, not loudly, not like a break, but more like ice breaking underfoot, quiet and slow. She had walked away from what was left of her life in the city and never looked back. And now here she was in a town that smelled like coal smoke and wet horse, with her last coins gone to the porter and nothing but a thin coat to her name. Across the street, the doors to the saloon creaked open again. She glanced over, heart lurching. A man stepped out, his coat dark against the snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a slow way of moving, like he didn't rush for anyone. His hat was tipped low over his brow, and snow dusted the shoulders of his duster. He looked up once and saw her. She looked away quickly, blood rushing to her cheeks. A woman standing alone at the station, even in this weather, got a certain kind of attention. She didn't want it. Not from anyone like him, not again. She pulled her satchel closer and tried to shrink against the post. But the man crossed the street anyway. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, a few feet from her, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. He looked older than her, maybe mid-30s, with a face carved from hard living. Not cruel, just serious. Steady. You waiting for someone? He asked finally. She nodded too quickly. Yes, a Mr. or Ms. McAllister. From the Rocking H Ranch. I was told they'd meet me here. The man's expression didn't change. He took off his glove, pulled a hand through his short beard, then looked down the road like he expected someone to appear just because he did. You Mary Ellen Harper? She hesitated, then nodded again. Yes. He extended his gloved hand. Clay McAllister. I sent the letter. Something inside her dropped. Oh, I thought that I'd be here sooner. He looked at the sky. Storm slowed us up. Wagons down the road. Thought I'd best come see if you were still here. He gave a short nod, then looked her over again, not in that way men sometimes did. Not like he was weighing her body, but like he was sizing up a problem. You got warmer clothes? She shook her head. Well, let's go. He turned, already walking, and she had to catch up to him, nearly slipping on the icy planks. She didn't know what to say, and he didn't offer much. They reached the wagon a minute later. Two horses stood tethered, steam rising from their backs. He helped her up without asking, his hands firm but not rough. She sat on the worn bench, stiff and small beside him. He handed her a blanket from the back, and she took it, tucking it around her knees. They rode in silence through the snow-covered prairie. Hills rolled in the distance, dotted with pines and black rock. Fences lined the road in crooked rows. Now and then, a hawk crossed overhead. The world felt too big, too quiet. He spoke after a long time. You got experience with children? She hesitated. I do. 2 years as a governess in Indiana. Before, her voice caught. Before I left. He didn't ask what happened. She was grateful for that. You'll be looking after my sister's kids. 2 boys and a girl. She passed last spring. Their father too before that. So it's just me and the ranch hands now. I'm sorry. He nodded like he'd heard that before and didn't quite know what to do with it. They've had a hard year. I don't expect miracles. Just keep them safe. Teach them something if you can. I'll do my best. He glanced over. That's all I can ask. They rode another hour before the ranch came into view. Long, low buildings, a windmill, smoke curling from a chimney. Lights glowed warm behind frosted glass. It didn't look grand, not like she imagined when she read the letter, but looked steady, like it wasn't going to fall apart under her. Clay helped her down again, then led her inside. The warmth hit her like a slap. She blinked against it, heart racing. A big dog lifted its head from a rug by the fire. A girl of maybe 8 sat on the floor with a book, while 2 boys, a little older, played checkers at the table. They all looked up when they saw her. Quiet, uncertain. She couldn't blame them. Clay cleared his throat. Kids, this is Miss Harper. She's going to be staying with us. The little girl stood up first. Do you like stories? Mary Ellen smiled, something thawing in her chest for the first time in weeks. Very much. The girl nodded solemnly, then went back to her book. Clay looked at her again. You hungry? She opened her mouth, then closed it, then nodded. Her throat was tight again. All right, he said. Let's get you something hot. And just like that, her life turned a page. Not a miracle, not a dream, but maybe something better, something real. The kitchen smelled of cornbread and stew, the kind of smells that could pull warmth into your bones after too long in the cold. Mary Ellen sat at the long wooden table with a chipped mug of tea between her hands, its steam curling around her cheeks. The children had gone quiet again, tucked in upstairs by Clay, who said little but moved with a sort of care that surprised her. He wasn't soft, not by any means, but he didn't bark or shove. He just did what needed doing and expected others to do the same. There was a kind of calm to it. Oh wait, she hadn't expected that either. Across the kitchen, a woman moved with sharp purpose, setting bowls on the counter, wiping flour from her hands. She was about 50, tall and lean, with gray streaks in her dark braid and sleeves rolled to her elbows. When she finally looked at Mary Ellen, there was no smile, only a narrowed sort of study. I'm Fern, she said. Cook, housekeeper, laundress, nurse, whatever needs doing. Mary Ellen, she said, standing awkwardly, not sure whether to offer her hand or not. Fern didn't take it. You got a letter and showed up, is that it? Yes. Fern gave a short, dry nod. We've had 3 others do the same in the past year. 1 left after a week. 1 made it to the second storm. The last one, she paused. Well, she wasn't a fit. Mary Ellen swallowed. I see. You last longer than the stew in the pot. We'll get along fine. With that, Fern turned back to the stove. Mary Ellen sat down again, carefully. She'd dealt with women like Fern before, the kind who held up a house with their bare hands and had no patience for weakness. There was no malice in her, not yet. Just warning. Mary Ellen could live with that. The stew was good, thick with potatoes and chunks of beef. She ate slowly, grateful and unsure if she was allowed to be. After a while, Fern glanced over again. Clay doesn't talk much, she said. but he sees more than he says. You think you've got something to hide, best keep it buried deep. Mary Ellen looked down at her bowl. I'm not hiding anything. Fern didn't answer, just wiped her hands and left the kitchen. The next morning, Mary Ellen woke early to the sound of boots on wood and men's voices outside. She dressed quickly and pulled her hair back in a knot, then stepped downstairs into the smell of coffee and wood smoke. The children were already at the table. The youngest boy, Samuel, about 6, watched her with wary eyes as he chewed on a biscuit. The other, Nathan, maybe 10, didn't look up at all. He kept one elbow on the table, poking at his eggs. The little girl, Lillian, offered a tight smile. Good morning, Mary Ellen said softly. Lillian answered, but the boys didn't. Fern poured coffee and handed her a plate. You'll find their moods run better with chores than with charm. Don't take it personal. After breakfast, Clay returned from the barn with 2 ranch hands, one tall and fair-haired, the other wiry and dark-eyed. Both smelled of horse and hay. Clay introduced them without much ceremony. This is Wade, he said, nodding toward the tall one. And that's Silas. They've been with us a while. If something needs fixing or fetching, they'll be the ones. Wade tipped his hat. He looked to be in his late 20s, with a boyish grin that came a bit too easy. Glad to have a new face around, miss. Silas didn't smile, just gave a stiff nod and looked her over with a gaze that lingered too long. You need anything, you come find me, Wade added. I know this place better than most. Clay didn't respond to that, just turned and headed back toward the barn. Fern caught the glance Mary Ellen gave the men and said under her breath, Don't let Wade's charm fool you. He's got more stories than sense. And Silas, she stopped, lips pressed thin. Silas is quiet, and quiet men either mean no harm or too much. Mary Ellen tucked the warning away. She'd learned to listen when women spoke in lower tones. Over the next week, she settled into a rhythm. The children warmed to her slowly. Lillian followed her like a shadow and liked to read aloud from books she half memorized. Nathan kept a distance, suspicious of kindness, and watched everything. Samuel cried once when he spilled his milk and hid under the porch until Clay coaxed him out. Mary Ellen sat with them for lessons at the long table and taught them their letters, numbers, geography, and hymns. It was a quiet life, but one with weight. She liked it, or maybe she just liked not having to run anymore. Still, there were cracks she could feel, even if no one spoke of them. Clay came home some nights with blood on his sleeve from a horse, or a bruise on his knuckles, and never explained. She heard Wade and Silas arguing once behind the bunkhouse. Something about a missing saddle and who knew what. The words weren't kind, and neither were the looks they gave each other afterward. Fur, meanwhile, grew colder the longer Mary Ellen stayed. She watched Mary Ellen closely during meals, always asking odd questions. Where she was born, what her parents did, if she knew any bankers in Chicago. At first, Mary Ellen answered plainly. But one night, when Fern asked if she'd ever been married, something in her voice changed. It wasn't curiosity anymore, it was digging. No, Mary Ellen said, her throat dry. I haven't. Fern gave a look that said she didn't believe her. Later that week, Mary Ellen found an old newspaper stuffed under the pantry shelves, yellowed and crumbling at the edges. The headline stopped her cold. Banker's daughter disappears after scandal. Engagement to wealthy heir called off. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Her name wasn't printed, but it didn't need to be. She remembered the photograph they took without her consent, the whispers in the hallway, the way her father's shoulders curled in shame. She tucked the paper in her coat and burned it behind the shed that evening, smoke curling into the dusk. When she came back inside, Fern looked at her longer than usual, but said nothing. That night, after the children were in bed, Clay stood by the fire, watching the flames. She sat nearby, mending a tear in Samuel's sleeve. The silence between them had grown more comfortable lately, filled with small moments instead of distance. You know, Clay said finally, Wade wanted the job I gave you. Said he had a cousin could teach the children. Mary Ellen looked up. Why didn't you get it to them? I didn't like his reason. He turned slightly. Didn't trust it. She didn't ask what it was. She could guess. "Do you always trust your gut like that?" she asked. He gave a quiet laugh. "Out here, it's the only thing that's kept me alive." Their eyes met. Something heavy passed between them. Something unsaid, but seen. She looked back at the fire. "I haven't always been honest about where I come from." He didn't flinch. "Figure that. I'm not a criminal," she said softly. "Just someone who didn't know when to stop trusting the wrong people." He nodded once. "Then you'll fit right in." She didn't know what he meant by that, but the words settled into her like a promise. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted and a dog barked low and long in the dark. Mary Ellen looked toward the window. The night felt too still. There were secrets here. She could feel them in the bones of the house. Wade's easy charm hid something sharp. Fern's quiet disapproval had a shape now, like she knew too much and wasn't sure what to do with it. And Silas, who barely spoke at all, watched everyone with eyes that missed nothing. Mary Ellen wasn't sure who she should trust. But Clay was steady. Whether that made him safe, she didn't know yet. But she was starting to hope. It began with a saddle cinch cut clean through. Clay found it early one morning before sunrise, when the horses were restless and stomping in the cold, steam rising from their flanks. He ran a hand down the leather and held up the strap, scowling at the slice. It hadn't frayed or snapped from use. Someone had cut it, deliberately, quietly, in the dark. Mary Ellen saw the set of his jaw when he came back in. He didn't mention the saddle, just took his coffee and stood by the stove with a stillness that made the room go tight around him. Fern noticed, too. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and gave him a look across the table. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing that can't be fixed," he said. "But someone's getting sloppy." Mary Ellen watched him from her place near the fireplace, the children still rubbing sleep from their eyes beside her. She felt it in her chest, the shift in air, like something had cracked under the surface. Later, when Clay stepped outside to check the fence lines, she asked Fern quietly, "What did he mean?" Fern didn't answer right away. Then she said, "You stay close to the house and keep those children inside after dusk." Mary Ellen nodded, heart thudding harder than it should. That evening, she kept the lamps lit longer and double-checked every door latch, though she didn't quite know why. The change in the house was slow but sure. Clay became more watchful, and Wade stayed too close. He lingered around the kitchen more than usual, always offering to chop wood or carry something that didn't need carrying. His grin still came quick, but it didn't feel warm anymore. It felt like someone keeping up an act for too long. "Been awful cold out," he said one morning, leaning against the doorframe while Mary Ellen helped Lillian with her boots. "Cold makes folks restless, brings out strange moods." Mary Ellen didn't look at him. "Children are staying in today." Wade crouched down beside her, his voice dropping low. "You know, Clay may act like he's all calm and sturdy, but he's been known to snap when cornered. Ask anyone in town. If he thinks someone is lying to him, it don't end well." She met his eyes, steady. "Then it's a good thing I haven't lied." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hope not." He left after that, but the chill he brought lingered longer than the snow. Nathan was the first to say it out loud. They were upstairs in the schoolroom, a small loft space with crooked shelves and a map tacked to the wall. Nathan had gone quiet during reading, eyes on the window. Finally, he whispered, "I think someone's sneaking around the barn at night." Mary Ellen looked up from Lillian's spelling book. "Why would you say that?" "I heard it." He looked serious now. "A couple nights ago, boots in the snow. I thought it was Clay, but I saw him asleep on the porch chair. Whoever it was, they didn't want to be seen." She leaned forward. "You didn't go out, did you?" He shook his head. "I know better." Still, the fear in his voice was real, and it lodged itself in her chest like a sliver. That night, she told Clay what Nathan said. Clay nodded once, then loaded his rifle without a word. The ranch got quiet after that. Too quiet. Silas stopped coming in for meals. Fern locked the pantry, which Mary Ellen had never seen her do before. The children picked up on it, too, speaking in whispers, staying close to one another, even sleeping in the same room some nights. Then came the fire. It started in the tack shed just before dawn. The blaze snapped loud enough to wake the whole house, and by the time Clay and the men got outside, the flames were licking at the edge of the barn. They beat it down with wet sacks and snow shovel buckets, coughing through smoke, eyes wide with disbelief. The damage wasn't devastating, but it was a warning. Someone had poured kerosene, and the tracks in the snow went toward the woods, then vanished. Afterward, Clay stood in the half-burned remains, hands on his hips, face grim. "This wasn't random," he said. "Fern was there too, clutching her shawl. You think it's about the land?" "Maybe." Mary Ellen frowned. "What do you mean?" Fern looked toward the distant hills. "Clay's had offers, more than a few, from men who want to buy this ranch. He never entertained them. Some of them didn't take that kindly." Clay nodded. "The worst of them's a man named Harmon Duval. Owns property north of here. Wants to control all the grazing routes." "I've heard of him," Fern said, her voice tight. "He's not above dirty work." Mary Ellen had never met Duval, but something about his name sent a chill up her back. Not just the idea of a man greedy for land, but a man who paid others to do his bidding while he stayed clean. But Clay shook his head. "This ain't Duval's way. He sent a lawyer before a torch." Silas stood a little ways off, arms crossed. "Maybe he sent both." No one laughed. That night, Mary Ellen found something tucked into her satchel upstairs. It was a folded piece of paper, no name on it, written in a jagged hand. "You think you know who you're working for? You don't." Asked what happened to his sister's husband. She stood in the cold lamplight, heart pounding. Clay had told her his sister's husband died, just like his sister. But not how, not when, not why. She brought the note down to Clay after the children were asleep. He read it, face unreadable. Then he folded it slowly and set it on the table. "You want to ask me something?" he said. "Yes," she said, almost breathless. "What happened to him?" Clay didn't answer right away. He stood by the fire, then walked over to the window and looked out into the night. "He was no good," he said at last. "Gambled, drank, laid hands on her. I tried to keep the kids away from it. From him. One day, he rode into town and didn't come back. Folks said it was a bar fight gone wrong. But I never believed it was an accident." She felt her skin go cold. "You think someone killed him?" "I think someone let it happen. Maybe helped along. But I don't lose sleep over that." Mary Ellen tried to steady her voice. "Do you know who?" He turned to her then, his face older in the lamplight. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to." She didn't sleep that night. 2 days later, the twist came. Wade didn't show up for supper. At first, no one noticed. Ranch hands often stayed out late when fencing or drinking in town. But by morning, his horse had returned without a rider. Clay and Silas searched the hills. When they came back, Clay was pale and tight-lipped. Found blood. And Wade's knife. No sign of him. That afternoon, a deputy from Red Rock rode in with a telegram. Clay read it twice, then handed it to Fern. Her face darkened as she read. "What's going on?" Mary Ellen asked. Clay handed her the telegram. It was brief. "Sheriff arrested Harmon Duval in Great Falls. Fraud charges. Not in Red Rock in weeks. Alibi clear. Find your fire starter closer to home." The ground shifted under her feet. "Duval didn't do it," she said. "No," Clay agreed. "That only leaves one of ours." There was silence, heavy as snow. Silas sat alone on the porch that evening, cleaning a gun he claimed he'd never used. Mary Ellen watched him from the parlor window. His eyes were sunken, his mouth hard. She realized she'd never once seen him smile. Not at the children, not at the horses, not even at a good meal. That night, Nathan crept into her room. "I found something," he whispered. She sat up in bed. "What is it?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was a folded note, one of hers. From weeks ago, the one she'd written to Lillian during her first spelling lesson. But someone had scribbled on the back, directions, codes, names. She scanned it quickly, then stopped. It was a map of the ranch, marked with excess. She stared at Nathan. "Where did you find this?" in Silas's bunk. Her mouth went dry. You mustn't tell anyone yet. Let me talk to Clay. But when she tried, Clay wasn't home. He'd ridden out to town, taking one of the hands with him. Fern said he'd be gone till morning. So she waited. And when night fell, and Silas came inside and locked the door behind him, her heart began to race. She was alone with the children, and someone had started the fire. Wade was gone, and Silas now looked at her like he knew. Like he knew she had the map. Like he wasn't going to let her tell. Mary Ellen backed into the parlor slowly, keeping herself between him and the stairs. "Everything all right?" Silas asked, too calm. She nodded. "Yes, just checking the lamps." "You're not as clever as you think," he said, his voice low. Her hands shook. "Why are you doing this?" "I ain't done anything," he said, stepping closer. "Yet." But then a voice cut through the dark. Clay's. "I wouldn't finish that thought, Silas." Clay stepped through the front door, rifle in hand. Behind him was the sheriff from Red Rock. They'd come back early. Mary Ellen gasped, knees buckling. Silas froze, then raised his hands slowly. Clay moved past her and said to the sheriff, "He's been working for Duval's cousin. Promised him land in exchange for sabotage. We've got the map." The sheriff nodded. "He'll swing for Wade." Silas didn't speak, just looked at Mary Ellen one last time, then turned his head away. And just like that, the storm broke. But the damage had already been done. The days after Silas's arrest passed like walking through the ruins of a fire that hadn't quite burned itself out. The ranch was standing, but something in it had cracked, something quiet and deep, like the slow fault line beneath the earth. No one said it aloud, but they all knew. If Clay hadn't come back early that night, Mary Ellen and the children might not be alive. Clay tried to act like it was business as usual. He spent the mornings working the fences and the afternoons sorting supplies and running stock counts with the ranch hands. But Mary Ellen could see the weight dragging behind his every step. The betrayal hadn't just put them in danger. It had cut at his pride, his trust, and the quiet belief he'd built around protecting this patch of land and the people on it. Wade's disappearance left a hollowness, too. A body had never been found, and in town, whispers spread faster than wind through the canyons. Some folks thought he'd run off, part of the scheme all along. Others said he'd been caught in the crossfire, another casualty of someone else's war. Only Mary Ellen knew the look Wade had given her in that last conversation. Something unfinished, like he'd meant to say more. Something honest beneath all his smugness. And now, whatever it was, would stay buried. Fern hadn't cried, at least not where anyone could see. But she moved more slowly now, her voice softer, her eyes scanning the horizon more often than before. Clay tried not to look at her too long when they passed in the halls, but Mary Ellen noticed. There was something unresolved between them, something fragile and sharp, like broken glass under a rug. "I thought he'd changed," Fern said one night while drying dishes, the children asleep upstairs. "Wade, I really did. He reminded me of someone I knew when I was young, a bit reckless, but kind underneath. Turns out, I just saw what I wanted." Mary Ellen set a hand on hers. "You didn't imagine it all." Fern smiled, sad. "Maybe not, but it doesn't matter now." Mary Ellen's own world had shifted, too. Since Silas's betrayal, she'd started locking her door at night. Not out of fear anymore, but out of habit. A new instinct. Trust, once broken, didn't return like a lost glove. It rebuilt itself slowly, layer by layer. Clay had become even more guarded. He didn't say much after supper anymore, just stared at the fire while the children read or played quietly. Mary Ellen wanted to ask what he was thinking, but something always stopped her. He wasn't cruel, just closed, like someone who had lost too much to risk losing again. Then one evening, as the wind picked up outside and the trees groaned under fresh snow, he spoke. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, not looking at her. She blinked. "Leaving the ranch?" He nodded. "Going back east. Back to something easier." She shook her head slowly. "I've got no place to go, and I'm not sure easy ever suited me." He let out a low breath. "Didn't think so." He looked over at her, eyes tired but honest. I keep thinking I should have seen it. Silas. He was here all those years, and I never once thought he was working against me. You trusted him, she said. That's not weakness. It is out here, he replied. No, she said quietly. It's what separates you from them. He gave her a look then, something softer than he usually allowed himself. A thread of warmth tugged between them, but neither moved closer. Still, that moment stayed with her. A week later, a letter arrived. It was from Clay's lawyer in Helena. The contents were dry, legal, but at the bottom, scribbled in Clay's hand, were 4 lines that shook Mary Ellen to her core. Land is safe. Livestock restored. House rebuilt. But who do I leave it to if I don't have a family? She stared at the words, heart pounding. When she asked him about it that evening, he shrugged. I meant what I wrote. But you have Nathan and Lillian, she said, voice almost a whisper. He gave a small nod. And I'll provide for them. Always. But they're not mine. Not by blood. She stepped closer. That's not what makes a family. He looked at her then, raw. No, but it's what makes me hesitate. If I name them, and then something happens again, another betrayal, I'd have put everything into hands that might not hold it. Mary Ellen felt a flicker of hurt. You think I would use them like that? His jaw clenched. No, but the world doesn't always wait for our intentions. And I've lost too much. She didn't respond. Instead, she walked out into the cold, boots crunching through the frost, the weight of his doubt pressing down on her chest. The internal tension between them simmered, even as the ranch began to mend. With Silas gone and the sheriff keeping a close watch on any other troublemakers in the area, the immediate danger had passed. But peace didn't mean comfort. It just meant everyone had time to reflect on what had nearly broken them. Nathan grew quiet, more protective of his little sister. He asked deeper questions now, not just about books or animals, but about choices. Why some people lied. Why others hurt the ones they claimed to care for. I don't understand why Mr. Silas would do that, he said one afternoon. He always gave Lillian sugar cubes for the horses. Mary Ellen crouched beside him. Sometimes people do good things for bad reasons, or bad things for reasons that once made sense to them. He looked down. Is that what you think my father did? She froze, then touched his hand. I think your father was hurting in ways we'll never fully understand. But I also think he made choices that hurt others. And that's not your fault. He nodded slowly. I just want to grow up and be someone better. You already are, she said, her voice thick. In the weeks that followed, Mary Ellen took over more of the bookkeeping. She kept the children on a school schedule and helped organize spring planning lists. She wrote letters to town merchants, arranged supply orders, and one day caught herself using Clay's name without thinking. Ranch of Mr. Clay Dobson and family. When she saw what she'd written, she stopped. Then quietly she left it. It wasn't until the 3rd thaw of the season that something shifted again. Clay was mending a corral fence, sleeves rolled up, shirt damp with sweat. Mary Ellen came to bring him water, and as he took the canteen, their hands brushed. He paused. She looked up at him, and without a word, he leaned down and kissed her, firm but uncertain, like a man trying to remember how. She didn't pull away. They stood there in the sunlight and thawing wind, like the past was melting off them inch by inch. Afterward, they said nothing, just walked back to the house together quietly. But everything was different, not easier, just more real. Because after that kiss came new questions, harder ones. Would they keep living like this? Her in one room, him in another? Would the children be adopted formally? Would she stay, not as a guest, but as something else? One night, Clay sat at the table long after the dishes were cleared. I'm not good with words, he said, but I want you here. Not because I owe you, not because you helped, but because the house feels like something whole when you're in it. Mary Ellen blinked away sudden tears. And the children? She asked. I'll do it proper, he said. Adoption, guardianship, whatever it takes. They're yours and they're mine. That's enough. She stepped to him, laid a hand on his shoulder. It is. Still, they both knew the world wouldn't give them peace forever. Fern left the ranch that spring. Said she needed to find a sister in Carson City she hadn't seen in years. She hugged the children tight, gave Mary Ellen a letter she said not to read until after she'd gone. In it, she'd written, "You remind me of the girl I once was. Brave, not because you fought, but because you stayed. Don't waste that kind of strength. Love's harder than war." Mary Ellen folded the letter and kept it in her drawer. Clay buried Wade's knife beneath the cottonwood tree near the river. Said nothing while he did it. Just stood a while afterward, staring at the water. And the children. Nathan started helping in the stables, and Lillian learned to ride. They laughed more again. Trusted again. It was slow, but it came. And so did spring. The first blossoms on the trees. The sound of frogs near the creek. A house no longer haunted, but lived in. Every door open. Every room full. And for Mary Ellen, a life beyond the dreams she'd once been too scared to even speak aloud. The spring sun had returned, bright and full, warming the hills around the Dobson Ranch and turning the dirt roads into soft mud. The thaw always brought new beginnings, but sometimes it unearthed what had been buried too deep for comfort. On a quiet morning near the end of March, just as Mary Ellen was helping Lillian braid her hair before breakfast, Clay rode back from town with something strange in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, something heavier, like he'd been holding his breath all the way home. Mary Ellen met him by the stable, brushing the mud from her apron. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He didn't smile. "I think I have." He handed her a small, folded note. The handwriting was neat, pressed into expensive paper. She read it once, then again, slower. Her breath caught. "The man you call Clay Dobson is not who he says he is. I have proof. Meet me behind the grain depot at dusk alone. A friend." Mary Ellen's throat dried. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Clay," she said, steady but soft. "Is there something you need to tell me?" He looked away, jaw tight. "I don't know who wrote that, but it's not wrong." They stood in silence. Then he exhaled, and something in him gave way. "My name isn't Clay Dobson," he said. "Not really. It never was." The confession came slowly, like a man opening a wound he'd kept bandaged for too long. He sat at the edge of the porch while Mary Ellen stood beside him, arms folded, heart pounding. "I was born Caleb Doss," he said, "in Kansas. My father was a drunk who couldn't keep his fists off my mother. I left home at 15. Started working cattle up in Dodge, riding with a rough crowd. Somewhere along the way, I started using a fake name. Told people I was Clay Dobson, a quiet drifter. Didn't mean nothing back then. Just kept me out of trouble." He paused. "But then a rancher I was working for got killed. I didn't do it, but I was there. Wrong place, wrong time. Sheriff thought I had a part in it. I ran." Mary Ellen stared at him. "So this ranch. I bought under that name years later. Cash, quiet. No one ever looked too close. I built everything here, try to leave that past behind." "And Silas?" she asked. "He knew," Clay said bitterly. "Found out somehow. Said if I didn't give him a share of everything, he'd tell the sheriff who I really was." She sank down beside him, the weight of it crashing over her. "All this time," she whispered, "you built a life on a lie." He looked at her, eyes burning. "I built it to be better than what I came from. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But now I've hurt you anyway." She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she stood. "I need time." That evening, she went to the meeting spot behind the grain depot. She didn't tell Clay. She had to know who'd sent the note and why now. She waited in the shadows, the wind cutting between the buildings, her heart beating hard. A figure stepped from the alley, hat low. It was Fern. Mary Ellen's breath caught. "You?" Fern looked tired, older. "I didn't want to do it. I almost didn't. But I needed you to know what kind of man he really is." "You left," Mary Ellen said coldly. "You gave me that letter, told me to stay strong. And now this." "I loved him," Fern said, voice cracking. "In my own way. Before you came. Before everything changed." Mary Ellen felt it then. The sting of betrayal. But not from Clay. From Fern. "You wanted me to leave," Mary Ellen whispered. That's why you waited until now. Fern didn't answer. Mary Ellen stepped closer. He told me everything, Fern, and he's not proud of it. But he built a life worth something. That matters. You're making a mistake, Fern said, almost desperate. No, Mary Ellen replied. I'm making a choice. When she returned home, Clay was in the barn, saddling a horse. Where are you going? She asked. He didn't look at her. I sent a letter to the sheriff in Kansas. Told him the truth. Asked if there's a warrant still open. If there is, I'll ride back and face it. She stepped forward. You don't have to. I do, he said quietly, because I can't keep living in fear. And I won't bring that danger to the children. Mary Ellen swallowed hard. And if they say there is, I'll go, he said. Serve whatever time's left. Come back if I can. She stood there, trembling. We need you. He looked at her then, soft but certain. I need me too, the real me. And if I don't make it right, I'm no better than Silas. She walked to him, placed a hand on his chest. I'll wait, she said. Whatever comes. The reply came 10 days later. Clay read it silently, then handed it to her. Statute expired. Case closed. No active warrant. Consider matter resolved. Sheriff Tomlinson. She stared at the words, breathless. You're free, she whispered. He gave a small, stunned nod. I guess I am. The next week brought a different storm. Nathan had wandered downriver alone, chasing a runaway calf. When Mary Ellen and Clay found him, he was soaked and shivering, standing on a rock where the river curved sharp. Don't move, Clay called, boots pounding over grass. Nathan looked up, wide-eyed, tears streaking his face. I just wanted to help, like you do. Clay didn't hesitate. He splashed into the current, fighting the pull of the cold water, and reached Nathan just as the boy slipped. The current yanked them both down. Mary Ellen screamed. Then, Clay surfaced, one arm wrapped tight around the boy, kicking hard toward shore. They collapsed onto the bank, coughing, breathless. Mary Ellen rushed to them, wrapping Nathan in her arms, then Clay. You're both safe. You're safe. Clay looked at her, chest heaving. He's brave. Like his mama. Mary Ellen blinked fast. And like his father. That night, after the children were asleep, Clay sat by the fire. I want to do it, he said. Do what? Mary Ellen asked. Make it official. You, me, the children, all of it. She stepped forward slowly. You want to marry me? He looked up. I want to be yours. And I want you to be mine. No lies. No more fear. Just the life we've already built. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Yes, she said. I want that. They married 2 weeks later, under the cottonwood tree where Wade's knife had been buried. The wind was soft, the sky wide and bright. Lillian scattered wildflowers on the ground, and Nathan held Clay's hand as the preacher spoke. When they kissed, it wasn't just love. It was survival, trust, a promise built not on dreams, but on everything they'd already endured. And when they walked back toward the house together, as husband and wife, there was no grand celebration. Just supper on the table, warmth in the hearth, laughter in the rooms. A family made not by blood, but by choice, by fire, and by everything that still lay ahead. Spring stretched into summer like a long breath finally let out. The land turned green again. The fences stood mended, and the air carried the scent of sage and sun-warmed dirt. Life didn't stop, not even after all that had happened. It just changed, softened in some places, hardened in others. Mary Ellen woke most mornings to the sound of Nathan's boots running across the floorboards. Always too loud, always in a hurry. Lillian liked to linger in bed, humming to herself, staring out the window at the cottonwoods as if listening for stories in the wind. They had both grown in ways she couldn't name, quieter, stronger. They didn't speak much about the night Clay nearly drowned pulling Nathan from the river. But it lived in all of them, unspoken and clear as thunder far off in the hills. Clay worked the land like a man at peace for the first time. He whistled sometimes, always the same old tune, and he fixed things he used to leave broken. Not just fences and doors, but little things too, Lillian's doll, the loose leg on the dining chair, the broken handle on Mary Ellen's trunk from the train station. He was different now, more present. Still quiet, still haunted at times, but grounded in something real. Every now and then, he would take Mary Ellen's hand and ask, "You sure about this? About me?" And she would squeeze his fingers and say, "Every day, I'm sure." The townspeople had moved on quickly after Silas's disappearance. His ranch was sold off in pieces, his house left empty until some new family came west looking for land and promise. Nobody asked too many questions. Out here, people knew when to let sleeping dogs lie. Maybe they suspected something happened. Maybe not. Either way, no one missed him. Fern didn't return. She'd left a single note behind at the boarding house. No apology, no explanation, only a line from a hymn Mary Ellen remembered from childhood. "Come ye weary, heavy laden, lost and ruined by the fall." There were no goodbyes, just silence. But sometimes, in town, Mary Ellen swore she caught a glimpse of someone familiar behind a store window or across a dusty road. A face turning quickly away, a shadow ducking into a carriage. It could have been Fern, or it could have just been guilt looking back at her through strangers. What she knew for certain was that forgiveness didn't always come with a bow. Sometimes, it came only when you stopped needing it. She thought away, too. Less often now, but still with a strange ache. Not because she missed him, but because of the part of her that once believed his love was all she could hope for. That belief had died out in the snow, back at the train station. Clay hadn't just rescued her from that storm. He'd pulled her out of a life where she never thought she'd be seen for who she truly was. Now she was seen. Every day. And she saw back. One late afternoon, Clay stood with Nathan by the fence line, teaching him how to read the clouds. "That kind there," he said, pointing, "means wind's coming. You watch it. You learn to feel the shift." Nathan nodded, wide-eyed. "How do you know all this?" Clay smiled. "Because I've seen what happens when you don't." Mary Ellen watched from the porch, her heart full in a way that felt almost painful. She'd once thought the worst parts of her story would follow her forever. But out here, under a sky wide enough to hold everything, the past didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a road, long, broken in places, but leading somewhere after all. That night, when the children were asleep and the lantern burned low, she turned to Clay in bed and whispered, "I used to think dreams were just what people told themselves when they were too tired to keep fighting." He looked at her. "And now I think dreams are just another kind of work," she said. "You have to keep choosing them. Keep building them, even when it's hard." Clay touched her cheek. "We'll build it together." Outside, the wind rustled the grass and the trees swayed gently under the stars. It hadn't been an easy story. There'd been lies, loss, betrayal, and pain. But it had been honest in the end. And sometimes, that was more important than anything else. The governess at the station had been cold, forgotten, nearly broken. Now, she was warm, loved, and more whole than she'd ever believed she could be. Not because someone rescued her, but because someone had stayed.